Our last topic of the day, we got a matchup coming up here between the Mariners and the Braves. And so we want to talk about a couple superstars. Who's better, Ronald Acuña Jr. or Julio Rodriguez? I think the fun part about this one is they're both guys who are way better than they've been so far this year. But you can make an argument going into the season, they each might have been. I know Acuña was definitely the favorite for NL MVP. I think a lot of people were taking Julio Rodriguez to finally become an MVP here in his third season. So, what would your kind of initial reaction be if I just asked you the question, who's better, Ronald Acuña Jr. or Julio Rodriguez?
Shoot, you prefaced it by talking superstars. I thought you were going to say who's better, Jared Kelenic or Mitch Haniger. But okay, I can think on my feet, Acuña Jr. or Julio Rodriguez. As exciting of a ball player and as great as the smile is for Julio Rodriguez, I think Ronald Acuña Jr. is still just the better player. We've talked about it recently about Julio maybe putting that pressure on himself to say, can I go 40-70? Can I be 50-50? Whatever it is, I need to break the mold that Ronald Acuña Jr. broke, and they're following his lead in that way. And yeah, both those guys got off to slow starts. They're both heating up in many ways. But Ronald Acuña, I think, is just overall that marquee player. It's kind of like with Mookie Betts, where he's not flashy, and yet he's the best player in baseball. It's like Mookie Betts versus Fernando Tatis Jr. if you're talking about Southern California stars, right? One is just kind of consistent and lacks the flash, whereas the other one is all that and then some. And I think that's almost similar a little bit with Acuña Jr. and Julio Rodriguez, despite both of them just being regular dudes, and they're not over the top, right? But there's just something, I think, this intangible that Julio Rodriguez carries with him that gives him that little extra pop, whereas Acuña is going out there every day, doing it, grinding away to 70-plus stolen bases.
I think, crazily enough, Julio Rodriguez has been more marketable, or at least that's how Major League Baseball has positioned it, where I think it helped having the All-Star game in Seattle and the show that he put on in the Derby. That really raised his profile. But I see a lot of Julio Rodriguez on commercials, and I don't know if I'm missing them, but I don't know if I see quite as much of Acuña. It's crazy to me that Acuña is only 26. Looking at it now, like, I feel like he's been in the league forever, but he's still got a lot of career left. And he is so unbelievable with the stolen bases, with the power. I think the complete ball player, if you had to give me a choice on who I would take for the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, I think I would rather have Julio Rodriguez because he's playing center field. I think he brings more impact all around. But we just saw what Acuña did. We have never seen a J-Rod put up a season like that. So it's hard for me to argue the other side of saying that J-Rod is better than Acuña at this moment.
This is a great conversation, like Gunnar Henderson versus Bobby Witt Jr. Go back and listen to that one from just a few days ago. You talked about the marketability. Julio Rodriguez, I believe, it wasn't a podcast, but he had a YouTube show for the Mariners before he had even debuted, right? It speaks English incredibly well. So you don't have that same language barrier that other players from Latin American countries do have. They're both incredibly young, right, with their slow starts. And yet both of them are guys who signed those long-term extensions. One of them paid a lot better than the other. In fact, I think Julio Rodriguez is making more than double what Ronald Acuña make. I don't know who his agent was for that. But yeah, these two guys, it's going to be fun to watch them. And, it would be great that you could have them in the same league, like a Gunnar Henderson and a Bobby Witt Jr. and maybe even better if they were in the same division. But I like that you maybe only get to see them once a year. It does become that marquee matchup between Acuña Jr. and Julio Rodriguez. As you mentioned, Julio can play that premier defense in center field. But with Acuña, both of them have been MVP kind of guys, right? Like I think we know that, but Acuña at the top of that lineup, number one, when he goes, the team goes, right? And since the start of the last season, Atlanta has nearly a 700 winning percentage when he records at least one hit in the first inning. And I say it that way because he's gotten a hit twice in the first inning in the past. So when he goes, Atlanta goes. And I think that just sets the table, and it's the first domino to get so much more of that going. And I think eventually that probably will be true for Seattle. But if we're talking about right now, I still got to stick with Ronald Acuña Jr.
It's pretty crazy that these guys have each only hit one home run this year. That's
Right?
nuts to me. We're 25 plus games in for both of them, and it's one home run. I think very similarly too. When J-Rod gets going, the team gets going. I mean, we're seeing the Mariners finally start to take off a little bit. There's been two things that I think have coincided with that. Their rotation has been unbelievable the last 2 weeks, and Julio Rodriguez starting to hit for a higher average and pull himself out of it a little bit. I think with both of these guys, we sort of expect that home run total to at least clear 30. So when you're getting this far into the year and it's only at one, I'm just imagining the fireworks they're going to set off in the middle of this summer here when it gets hotter. Maybe these guys heat up as well and start putting up some big totals. But yeah, it's a conversation that I think we followed for years. Right now, Acuna better, but I think long term I like J-Rod. So I think we could both agree on right now, which is where we'll kind of close here on who's better in the long haul. If you had to pick one of them, contract aside, if we put the contract in it, we'll take Acuna. But contract aside, who is the outfielder you would build your franchise around right now?
I think it also would be Julio Rodriguez, and some of that has to do with the fact that he had to get his right knee repaired. Acuna Jr. did, so there is a little bit of that history concern that you have. A lot less so after stealing 70 bases last year. Obviously, everything's okay with that, but that is, I think, somewhat of a concern. Julio is a little bit younger. I think he might flash a little bit more power there, being the center fielder that he is, and kind of being surrounded by a great core of players. So is Acuna Jr. But I think Seattle's group is just a little bit younger, and I think just might have a little bit more of that projectability in that window of contention. So in that capacity, yeah, I think I'd be happy with either of those guys, no doubt about it. But yeah, you know what? Going forward, if we're just saying on April 28th, 2024, until these two guys retire, I would also like to have Julio Rodriguez.
I think if I was to pick one superstar in baseball for my team, uh, regardless of position, just I could pick any guy. If I had a fantasy draft tomorrow and I'm the Mets GM and I'm picking one, it'd be hard not to take the 23-year-old superstar center fielder that's going to fill up the ballpark as well as do everything he's going to do on the field. But the marketability stuff is another thing that teams would also pay attention to, and J-Rod has the it factor. We thought this was the year he put all together, and maybe it is. The slow start, in some ways, a little more disappointing from J-Rod because I think this was a more pivotal year. But these guys, you can't go wrong picking either of them. It's two of the best players in baseball. That's why baseball is in really good shape right now, because there's a lot of great stars that we can look on.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I think you'd probably want J-Rod just because maybe he'd give you like Ichiro Suzuki's cell number, and maybe you could kind of bring him through to the ballpark, hang out with him. I mean, he seems to be friends with just about everybody. It very much is like Ken Griffey Jr. 2.0 in many ways, and that's nothing but a compliment for him.
Yeah, for sure.